Good morning, everyone. Try again. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining the Clallam EDC Coffee Chat, Coffee with Colleen. We appreciate you spending some time with us today. And we're very honored to have our County Commissioner, Mike French, join us, and the Recompete Planning Coordinator, Wirkebau, join us as well to share with us about the plans for the next 5 years regarding the Recompete funding that our area received, 35 million bucks. So pretty cool. So with that, just a couple house cleaning items first. I'm going to make sure you guys are on mute so that we don't inadvertently hear puppies bark or the like. And if you have any questions, we like it to be interactive. So please raise your hand and I will call on you. I'll be watching that and interject Commissioner French while he's presenting. And if you'd prefer that I read your question, you can put your question into the chat. So with that, I will let Mike take it away. Thanks so much, Mike, for joining us.
Hey, thank you. Can I share my screen?
Yep, you can now.
Okay. All right, do you see that?
It's coming. There it is. Great.
All right.
Yes.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me, Colleen. It's really great to be here to talk about some good news in the field of economic development and workforce development. We're here to talk about our award of, as you said, $35 million for the North Olympic Peninsula through the Recompete pilot program. So I'm going to speak a little bit about what the pilot program was and what its goals were. I'm going to speak a little bit about the process that we went through, but I'm going to spend most of our time probably talking about the projects that we have put forward with the funding that has been awarded to us. So our coalition, from a process perspective, we chose for this grant program a 2-county coalition, a regional approach, so that we weren't competing against other people, and we were successful with that approach. So that coalition contained representatives from both counties, all 4 of our cities, all 5 of our tribes. Our 2 EDCs in Jefferson and Clallam County are the North Olympic Development Council, Peninsula College, and a wide variety of other people, many of whom are here on the call with us today. And we're really grateful that everyone kind of got on with the same vision, which I think is a huge success in and of itself. And, and then we also were successful at getting $35 million in funding. So let me see here. There we go. So this program, the Recompete Pilot Program, was focused on alleviating persistent poverty in regions that had really seen a lot of economic malaise. And it was the most competitive project that EDA has ever run. They had 500 applicants, I believe. They were narrowed down to 22 finalists, which you see here on the screen. All 22 of those finalists were given a $500,000 strategy development grant. Which we used to hire some staff, to have grant writing resources, to get a lot of data and analysis of that data, as well as do some economic feasibility studies. And I just want to really highlight that there were 2 partners that were really impactful. One was the Washington State Department of Commerce, who matched our $500,000 strategy development grant with a Securing Federal Funding Initiative grant. But the second was the Clallam County EDC, which spent quite a bit of its own money on a lot of economic analysis that was really pivotal in phase 1 before we had those 2 $500,000 grants, and in phase 2. And so the Clallam County EDC, I think, was one of the driving forces that helped us, that helped our coalition remain data focused and also really helped propel us towards success. There were 6 finalists that were granted funds out of those 22 finalists, 6 awardees. We were one of them, the only one on the West Coast, the only one in Washington State. I think we had the 2nd highest award overall. I don't think any of the 6 got 100% of their total request. And if you're looking for the 6th star, it is in Puerto Rico. There we go. The metric that the EDA really used as the North Star of this program was the prime age employment gap. This is a chart of the labor force participation rate in the whole United States over the last 70 years. And as you see, after women entered the workforce, that labor force participation rate for 25 to 54-year-olds really remains above 80%, with some slight dips from recessions and things like that. In areas like ours, our labor force participation rate for that age cohort can sometimes be behind the national average by 10 to 15 points, depending where you are in Clallam or Jefferson County. So that's the metric that EDA wanted us to solve. They said, this is your target. How are you going to get people that are not in the workforce, that are 25 to 54 years old? How are you going to get people that are not in the workforce, that are in this age group, into good jobs? And we took a strategy that was really based, number one, on targeted industries. Number two, that was based on a short pathway to success. And three, again, we targeted a wage rate of about $26 an hour plus benefits. Our targeted industries were natural resources, which represents kind of the historic forestry industry that has always existed on the North Olympic Peninsula, but with kind of a broader 21st century view. Maritime, which is, of course, a very strong industry in Jefferson County, but also Clallam County, and manufacturing. And all three of those historically have provided good jobs, but also have that short pathway as far as training necessary for someone to be successful. The theme of our plan that we put forward was connections. What our analysis was, so we made our final application and submitted it in April of this year. And then immediately in June, we were told we had to do a virtual site visit, which was this high stakes job interview where we had to pitch our plan to the selection committee. This is a couple of slides I'm going to show you, I think, from that presentation that we made to them. And what we really pitched was a lot of the last 30 years where we've seen some of our industrial decline have been really plagued by disconnection. We've seen obviously some economic disconnection. We've seen our workers disconnected from the workforce, which is the whole point of this program. We've seen that, in many cases, our governments weren't as connected and weren't as communicating and working as well as they should have. And our solution was connections. So we want to make sure our governments are connected. I would say our process really showed a lot of success in that. We had, again, a room full of people. We had weekly Zoom meetings among a wide variety of leaders on the North Olympic Peninsula where everybody was talking this, everyone was speaking the same language and agreeing, on that strategic vision. I think that just the process showed a lot of success in getting a lot of our different government agencies connected. But we also wanted to connect our legacy industries to 21st century innovations. We wanted to connect people to support services and good jobs. We wanted to connect our employers to our workforce development agencies. There's a lot of connections that we found in between the 8 projects that we put forward. But unfortunately, not all 8 of our projects were funded. So what we ended up with was one plan that had 3 focus areas and 6 funded projects. That plan really, represents a strategic vision for the entire North Olympic Peninsula. It's, both on some level somewhat broad because it's a regional plan, and it's also a little narrow because it's really only a plan about workforce development and economic development. Our 3 focus areas were workforce development, which really was kind of, it felt like that's what this program was built for. The second was supportive services, or what we throughout the process called barrier removal, recognizing that in many cases, if people are not in the labor force, there are probably some significant barriers they experience that prevent them from being in the labor force, things like access to childcare or transportation. And then our third focus area was job creation. And that focus area became a target for us because the data showed us that with the number of people that were in our prime age employment gap, which I believe between the 2 counties was around 2,700, there weren't enough good jobs to quickly transition them into if job creation was not a part of our strategy. And I also want to say that, for our plan, we chose those 3 focused areas as part of a balanced approach. Not every finalist chose that approach. When our phase 1 applications went in, was that last October or September? One of the first things that a lot of us on the task force did when that was when the finalists were selected is we read all the other finalists' plans. And some of those plans were really just entirely focused on one of these focus areas. They were entirely focused on supportive services or entirely focused on workforce development. And we felt like the right plan for the North Olympic Peninsula was that balanced approach. So these are the 6 project areas that are funded. I'm going to go through them one by one, but first I wanted to talk about the 2 that were not funded. One was a Jefferson County focused project, the Port Townsend Boatyard expansion. That was a very large job creation project that, we still really support and believe in, but I think the that weight will be carried probably by Jefferson County leaders, not by people like me in Colleen County. And the Port of Port Townsend was the lead of that project. The other one, which I think we should talk about a little, is the Natural Resource Innovation Center. This was one that Clallam EDC had been taking the reins on. The ask was, I believe, a little under $4 million. It was not funded. But we heard from EDC that they really loved the project and they wanted to work with Colleen on, are there other funding sources that we can use to move that forward that aren't in the recompete bucket? So Colleen, do you want to add some stuff on this?
Yes, I would. So typically what EDA funds is job creation projects, and they always have a public works and economic adjustment assistance grant that's always out and available at all times. And so, you know, we had applied for 50 million in total with the North Olympic Peninsula Recompete Coalition. And one of the things that they said was that, you know, they wanted to fund 6 entities. They only had 184 million. Do that math, and that doesn't come up with 50 million per application. So no one, I think one in Kentucky received one applicant in Kentucky received 41 million, but that represented 12 counties. We got 35 million for 2 counties. So, you know, all in all, I think per capita, we probably did receive the most funding from that perspective. But what they said is that these job creation projects, which was NREC and the boatyard expansion, they thought there were other ways to get these projects funded. And they right now just had a meeting with Economic Development Administration yesterday with many of their team members. And they're not to complicate things, but there's another program outside of Recompete called Tech Hubs. And Oregon and Washington put in a tech hub for basically the building industry, but it's called the Northwest Mass Timber Tech Hub. And so folks from that organization, from Oregon State University, and leaders there came up last week and met with us for 3 days to identify what projects could be funded that could also be supported by this tech hub. So they are all in and helping us. And I do feel like NREC, the Natural Resource Innovation Center, is going to be funded by 2025. They told us this is non-competitive, competitive funding, whatever that means. But we'll take it. And, you know, there's a bunch of job creation projects that from community kiln expansion and improving barging services that we are creating. This grant application we'll have submitted by the end of the month.
Great. So more to come
Mike.
on that. And of course, Natural Resource Innovation Center was really about that 21st century collaboration and innovation inside of natural resources. I'm excited to see, you know, what the future holds for that, but we're going to be kind of crossing our fingers for those funding sources that have been identified to support it. So I'm going to now transition onto our 6 projects. So the first project to talk about is the Olympic Peninsula Resource Hub. This is our supportive services or barrier removal project. It's got about $9.8 million, and the project lead is the Olympic Community of Health. They were actually a fairly late comer to our Recompete Coalition. They were identified, I think, by Dr. Ames, because they were in the process of creating a community care hub model that was really focused, you know, they're a healthcare organization. It was really focused on the social determinants of health and making sure that their healthcare clients were, you know, seeing their other social needs met. And so it made a lot of sense. It didn't make a lot of sense for us to create our own model for Recompete and them to create their own model for that. It made a lot of sense to combine them. And for them to kind of have our Recompete participants as just a special demographic that they would serve. So we were able to kind of braid those 2 funding sources together. They're using community-based workers to do kind of a case management style with closed loop referrals to make sure that people have the supports they need. The Olympic Peninsula YMCA will do a participant voucher program for our Recompete participants, where if they have childcare needs, they can have a voucher that can support them. If they have transportation needs or other basic needs, they can apply for vouchers, and Peninsula YMCA will supply that. One thing to point out is that with all of these projects, there's going to be a project lead and there's going to be a host of partners. One of the cool things that EDA did with this is they broke our projects up into separate grants. And so what that means is Clallam County doesn't have to carry the entire weight of all the grant management, which would be really considerable for a $35 million grant. And so Olympic Community of Health will now kind of have their own contracting with EDA, and then they're going to have a huge amount of partners. That includes Clallam and Jefferson Transit, First Step Family Support Center, Peninsula Behavioral Health, and a lot more. And so again, this is the project that's focused on what barriers people might experience that prevent them from being in the workforce, and how do we solve those problems. The next project is the Workforce Development Project. Project lead is Peninsula College. This is just under $7 million.
And Susie has joined.
Oh, great. Dr. Eames is here. So if she wants to talk about this, she surely can. But the basic strategy of this is, of course, what are the shortest pathways that we can take using new and existing programs and new programs that are employer-driven, that get people into good jobs. We focused really on that we have that industrial focus around marine and natural resources and manufacturing. So I think one of the new programs will be a marine tech program that Peninsula College will develop. One of the existing programs that I believe was just created last school year was a natural resources program at the Forks branch of Peninsula College. That was a really cool program that was, again, employer driven. It started with a stakeholder committee of a bunch of employers who had open jobs and a completely dried up applicant pool that in many cases historically were four-year degrees that just, they were not seeing applicants. And so they worked with Peninsula College on what skills they needed, what certificates they needed. They created a 9-month program with an internship, and then that they take the reins with on-the-job training after that. So those are the kind of programs that we're talking about. The other thing to talk about with workforce development is one of the focuses is in mobility. We wanted to make sure that, we weren't telling everyone in a rural county, you have to come to Port Angeles or you have to come to Port Townsend or Forks to get workforce training. And so with both, one of the projects is VR headsets that can do trades education, things like training people how to drive forklifts. Those are mobile. Those can go to our school districts. Those can go to Peninsula College. Those can go out in the community so we can bring people to the workforce development. We can bring the workforce development to the people. Another program was mobile welding equipment that they can, again, take to Clallam Bay CQ and train people. Again, a lot of partners with this. Northwest School of Wood and Boat Building is a major partner in Jefferson County on that, marine trades kind of side. Jefferson County EDC, one of the cool parts of the process of creating all these investments is we had so many problem solving moments. One of them was, as we were kind of having the conversation around workforce development, Peninsula College and Jefferson County said, we really don't have a good enough connection to Jefferson County employers. And so that's something where Jefferson County EDC is stepping up and saying, let's make sure that we have a better connection, because how can your programs be employer driven if you don't have good relationships with employers in the region? And of course, Olympic Workforce Development Coalition, Bill Dowling, I think, is on the call today. They're bringing quite a bit of resources to supplement what Recompete is doing. They've been a great partner. Next projects we're going to talk about 2 job creation projects. Again, our job creation bucket is emptier than we would have liked it to be, but we're hoping that we can see funding come forward with the projects that we identified in other ways. But one of the main projects from a job creation perspective was the Peninsula Barging Network. The project lead is the Port of Port Angeles. It's a $6 million project that will purchase 3 barges, one with ocean-going capabilities, that have the opportunity for mobile port facilities that can better connect natural resources and other goods and services, both to, opportunities to process those natural resources on the peninsula and to external markets. And I believe the ocean-going barge can get all the way down to California. So this is a project where the Port of Port Angeles will be providing quite a bit of their own, both staff and financial resources to make this happen. Really, all Recompete is doing is purchasing those barges. So this is an example of those partnerships where, it's one thing to say, yeah, we've got $6 million for barges. That's great. But there's a lot of work on the back end that goes into creating the barging network. And so we're excited to see Port of Port Angeles take the reins on that and see what they come up with and how it can help to support a lot of our industrial partners. One example of a conversation I remember having around this was with the Olympic Region director of the DNR, who, when I told him about this, he kind of perked up because in certain regions, especially on the north coast of Clallam County, in there's certain harvests that they just don't have very many bidders for because of transportation costs. So if transportation costs can be ameliorated through barging, our junior taxing districts might see a huge benefit in bid prices as a lot more bidders can be competitive. The other job creation project is the CRTC thermal modification unit. We are purchasing them a thermal modification unit that I believe will let them double their capacity to make carbon fiber panels. The project lead is a mix of the Port of Port Angeles because they're the landlord and the CRTC. This is a really cool partnership with the Makah tribe where they have a forestry initiative. They harvest their own western hemlock, coastal hemlock. And just in the past few years, through a partnership with Washington State Commerce and the CRTC, they installed a mill out in Neah Bay so that they can, process their own natural resources, provide jobs for tribal citizens, and create value. So then that milled product can be transitioned to Port Angeles, where it can be upscaled again into a more developed product. And currently, I think the CRTC has a contract with the Department of Defense for quicker X structures using these panels. We're also looking at what other market viable sources, this might create. I think that with some of our strategy development grant, we did a ADU study on this. It identified some issues that we might have to work through, building code adoption and other market-based issues. But again, we're looking for what might be other sources for this in the market for this kind of product. But this was a really, fairly cheap project from our perspective, as it was $1.2 million for infrastructure. And the CRTC estimates they're, doubling their production will hire 40 to 50 folks over those 5-year period. And they have a very low barrier as far as training necessary. They're very good at the on-the-job training. Our next project is the Tribal and Underserved Communities Project. The project lead is the North Olympic Development Council, $8.5 million to serve all 5 of our federally recognized tribes, including the City of Forks and North Hood Canal Chamber. From an equity perspective, we really wanted to make sure that our rural areas were represented and had some special focus. When we have 4 tribes in Clallam County, 1 in Jefferson County, and 3 of those tribes are almost as remote and rural as you can get, all on the west coast of Washington State, the Makah, the Quileute, and the Hoh. And they, are very far flung. And so we wanted to make sure that we were recognizing that. And we wanted to make sure that especially those small tribes and cities had economic development professional capacity. I remember when Rod Fleck from the City of Forks was on our task force, and he said, I'm the city planner, I have a workload for that. I'm a city attorney, I have a workload for that, but my calendar keeps on filling up with recompete meetings. And I get it. There's not a lot of staff capacity for economic development at some of our smaller organizations, and so that's what this project can provide. And it also provides tribally directed project funding that will happen. The North Olympic Development Council will work with our tribes to find projects that the tribe can direct funding to that fit within our strategy of the 3 focus areas that we developed and fit within the EDA guidelines. One other note is when the EDA released the 22 finalists, after we had submitted our final application in April, they released a blog post talking about all the different collaborations that those 22 finalists had identified. And one of the things that, they pointed out, there was this many labor unions involved and this many colleges involved. And they pointed out there was 9 tribes involved. Our one project had 5 of those tribes. So we did, I think, a very good job of being collaborative and reaching out and getting everyone on board. And I think that that's a success. The last project is our governance project. The NOFO really highlighted governance. They wanted to make sure that we were properly investing in that collaboration. And we still tried to keep our price tag as low as we could for this. but it funds the Recompete Plan coordinator who's on the call with us, Erna Wirkebau. It funds a team for her of I think 2 FTEs for the 5-year period. It continues to fund the data analysis and reporting that we invested heavily in at the start of this. We created collaborations with Employment Security Department, with DSHS, with Washington State University for analysis. And of course, we had our local researcher, Dr. Dan Underwood. We want to continue being a data-focused coalition. It also funds coalition meetings so that we can provide oversight to all of the project leads through our coalition. And the last thing it provides is a marketing budget, because we have to find participants. We need to find people that are willing to put their hand in the air and say, you know, I'm going to take a chance on my future. And so that's our governance project. And all 6 of these projects, I'll go to my last slide. All 6 of these projects are currently working to contract with EDA right now. We've all refined our scopes of work to make sure that we're within the guidelines. I think that Angie Klon and I from Clallam County just got an email that our governance project was approved and the contracting will start. So the next month, we're likely to be going through that contracting process with EDA. And their hope is that we can start really spending this money early next year or late this year. One thing I will say is normally when you talk about, you know, a $35 million federal grant, people that know what they're talking about groan, because usually it comes with so much red tape and so much grant compliance and management that it's almost not worth it. In this project, we really felt like EDA invested the proper amount of resources to make this work. They were able to contract with that $500,000 strategy development grant fairly quickly. They've clearly put in a lot of resources on their end for the contracting for this $35 million. And we really have appreciated that. So I don't expect this to be, you know, if you've ever worked with the city and they talk about CDBG grants, like there's just so much work that goes into the compliance and management. We actually are pretty optimistic that this will be different. But that's our 6 projects. That's the funding that we've identified. And, you know, we also have a 10-page recompete plan. If anybody wants to read it, it's available on the EDA's website. I think it's a great read, but you know, it's 10 pages long, but that's basically, it gives the pitch for a strategic vision around economic development and workforce development for our entire region. And I think it in and of itself is a huge success story that our leaders were able to create it. So that's the Recompete project. That's our 6 projects that were funded, and I'm happy to take questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Mike. I do know, and I was hoping Susie could speak about the mobile training units, if she's able. I know she can't come on camera.
Yep, I'm here.
Great.
Thanks,
Thanks, Dr. Ames. Yes.
Great. Happy to be here. Sorry, not on camera this morning, but thank you, Mike, for a great presentation. One clarification, we had a modification with EDA after we got the grant. Originally, our hope was to build a marine manufacturing program in partnership with the Port of Port Angeles at their facility. For all sorts of bureaucratic reasons and federal rules, that wasn't possible. But we had some really great conversations with EDA, and they're really interested in having us experiment and try new things to reach the most rural corners of our district and our region. So we had originally thought we would purchase one semi-truck and outfit it with welding equipment. And it turns out now we're going to buy 2 semi-trucks. One will teach welding and one will teach components of marine manufacturing, like aluminum welding and electronics, for example. And we're going to experiment driving these trucks to all corners of Clallam and Jefferson County and bring the training to the people who can't get to our main campus. So, you know, picture us out in Nia Bay and La Push and Port Hadlock. And I'm super excited about what we might be able to learn from this and how we might be able to bring training to folks. And then one other just minor correction, the simulator trainers that Mike talked about, those are actually going to be stationary at the new SQUIM School District Skills Center. They're actually quite large and not really mobile, but they're going to be opening up their facility to Peninsula College. So the high school could teach that technology to kids, and we're going to be able to teach that technology to adults on nights and weekends, truck training, a backhoe, construction type equipment driving. And then also the School of Wood and Boat Building will get some money to bring new technology to their program. And then EDC Jefferson will get money to expand their support for entrepreneurs in both Jefferson and Clallam County. And all that money will run through Peninsula College and will manage all of those projects financially. So happy to answer any of their questions on the workforce training side.
Thank you for those clarifications. Each one of these projects has a very complicated budget. I was trying to stay on the high level, and sometimes when I get into the details, I mix them around. Each of these projects, like I said, has a very detailed budget and a very detailed staffing plan. Each of them could be its own presentation. So I really appreciate those clarifications. And I also wanted to point out one thing about that partnership between the Swim School District and Peninsula College around those virtual reality training devices. That's an example in my mind of prevention. We were really trying to stay focused on that 25 to 54-year-old cohort that is disconnected from the labor market. But if we're not at least being thoughtful about why are people being disconnected from the labor market in the first place, and how can we prevent that going forward, I think we weren't doing our job. So that's a really exciting project, I think, to highlight the prevention side. Because it will target that 25 to 54-year-olds through Peninsula College, but it's also targeting the younger cohort through the school district.
Terrific. So Pat McCauley, you have a question in the chat. I'm not really following it.
Well, my question is,
Please.
the NORPC governance, $3.2 million. I'm wondering why our own EDC isn't going to be the lead on the tribal one with the cities. It just seems that it's in our county. They should be staffing up to provide those services for partners in our own county. And this is going to the general development council, right?
So it's a good question. I think the main reason was the tribal underserved communities is serving both counties, and we didn't want to put Clallam EDC on the hook for serving a Jefferson County tribe and a Jefferson County Chamber of Commerce. And we also didn't feel like it was a shared lead. It wouldn't have been a good fit. And the second part of that is Clallam EDC already took on a bunch of work with NREC and with, a couple other issues. And Jefferson County also had a couple of big where there were subawards, both, I believe, in the barrier removal and workforce development component. So both EDCs had a lot of work product on their hands, and NODC, which served both counties and had a lot of the tribal relationships already, seemed like the better fit. But that's a fair question. Did I miss something on that, Colleen, that you wanted to?
No. I think the biggest thing is they cover a 2-county region, and the Hoh tribe is in Jefferson County. And so it did make a lot of logical sense to have them lead that tribal piece of it for the funding. And I see Dan Underwood from Olympus Consulting is on with us as well. He did a lot of research for us and worked with Washington State University Department of Health and Social Services and then Employment Security Department, and analyzed our, and this was a unique opportunity for us in both phase 1 and phase 2 to get the actual counts, to get actual data. And the first time around, and then Wazoo got the actual data, and we paid them to help us analyze it because of state laws. One agency can receive information, but it's frustrating. We can't get our own information, our own data about our own county. And so we have to pay Wazoo to be able to do that. And they did a great job, of course, but just even getting through the data sharing agreements took 4 months. I don't know, it was ridiculous. And but once we finally got some of that aggregated data, we were able to have Dan analyze it in such a way that we were able to take data and turn it into information that was important to us. And so, Dan, do you want to speak to any of the ahas that we came up with, looking through that information that we were provided, which did, talking to some of the graders and Scott Andis, who was in charge of the program, he said that was a factor that really made us stand out, that we had worked with state agencies that had actual counts, actual data to inform our decision-making process, which was unique. We were the only ones that did that of the 566 applications that they received.
I will be very brief, as this is news to me that you wanted me to speak to this issue, Colleen.
I know.
Okay. So as Colleen summarized, we received information from several different agencies that have control of the raw data. And with the control of the data comes monopoly power. And so you find yourself in a position of just doing everything you can to get what you need to work with. And all of that information came in too late for our April application. But that does not mean that the insights that were obtained are not of use moving forward with the Recompete program. What I can say at this point in time, because I don't have slides to show you, is that there are some very interesting and distinct patterns of what this target population looks like. For instance, the largest single group of individuals that are not participating in the labor force at present are men aged 35 to 39. I don't know about you, but my stereotypical thinking as an economist is that folks that are 35 to 39, especially men, those are their prime working years, and they are our biggest absent group of people. So the ways that these patterns of data can be used by people who are seeking to help these individuals is to see who the groups are and what their demographics look like in terms of things like work history, education levels, etc. So this overall pattern, it was basically a hump with the peak at 35 to 39 and a small hump for people 50 to 54 who will no longer be in the prime age by the termination of this funding. And rather, this group that's about 18 to 23, they're going to be in this group. And so as Mike had mentioned before, I think strategically looking at those young people and making sure that they go directly into the labor force is probably going to pay the greatest dividends to the community. So just to sum it up, there are some very important and interesting patterns in the data. I've summarized that in a couple of reports, and so that information is available to the decision makers.
Great. Thanks, Dan. See, you didn't need any forewarning about having to speak. You did a great job.
Thank you.
I knew you would. I love to put people on the spot. Sorry. Yeah. So and I see a question here from Stephen about, his question is regarding employer-driven workforce development. Given Port Angeles' population is twice as large as Port Townsend's or Sequim, I assume there would be more Port Angeles-based maritime and timber employers contributing to workforce development. Examples like Westport Platypus and other businesses within the port area, as well as the many leading timber companies. Are any of these companies in our most populous area, Port Angeles, involved in the employer-driven workforce development? The answer is yes. I don't know, Susie, if you would like to expand on that. We've done a lot of exploration with those businesses about what their employment needs are and those skill sets. I'll let you speak to that. I see you're on mute.
Yeah, thank you. So yes, as Colleen said, the answer is yes. All those employers that you listed partner regularly with Peninsula College to help us make sure that if we are offering curriculum that serves their future workforce, that it's relevant and that it's really connected to the skills that people need when they get on the job. So in our mobile training unit that we'll be designing, the curriculum and how it's taught will be dictated by those local companies. That's the beauty of job training program in a community college, is it's employer driven. So yeah, that's the short answer.
Great, thank you very much.
And to add to that,
Please.
it's not just about workforce development connections between those employers. One of the other projects, NRIC, hosted, I think, 2 at least in-person meetings where they brought a lot of those employers together to just talk about what are the other threats to your organizations? What are the other areas where you have, an off product that you don't have a source for, or you have these other struggles? NRIC really tried to stay out of kind of the political realm as far as doing advocacy, but they were really interested in what are the problems, what are the potential solutions, and how can we all work together to solve them. And I went to those meetings really listening carefully, being in the political realm, because if there were political solutions, we wanted to hear about those problems.
Mhm. Yeah, it has been really valuable to bring those employers together to understand the common characteristics, the challenges that they're all facing, and then look for sustainable, innovative ways that they can come up with to solve some of these problems. And, one of the barriers, as I mentioned before, is a lack of kiln capacity in our community. So looking at creating a community kiln potentially owned by the Port of Port Angeles, but that they would lease. And then, if just one entity would do it on their own, that's only going to solve their own particular problem, but it's not going to solve the community's forestry problem. And as we know, we have to create living wage jobs, which is, it's getting more and more expensive every year because our housing prices are increasing. Rent costs are increasing so dramatically that it works out to about now 26 to 28 bucks an hour to be able to have a job with benefits. And, these kind of companies can provide that. And it's not in many industries that is offered in our communities. So the next question from Jim McIntyre: data access being all snarled up is maddening. We agree. How can we get the legislature to put county ADOs, which is an EDC, directly into the data stream collected by various agencies? So I can speak to that. NOLA had a bill that we asked Representative Chapman to sponsor, and he did, House Bill 1912, which basically directed departments of revenue, L&I, ESD to share their data with Department of Commerce, because regularly that does not happen. Commerce has to do a data sharing agreement with Department of Revenue to get data. And that is a long, onerous process, even between state agencies, which seems crazy to me. But it's all about protecting proprietary data. And if information can be shared, if there are more than 4 entities within a group, and as long as one of those 4 isn't representing 70% or more of the total. And if that is the case, then that data can be shared. But very often in rural communities like ours, if you look at Clallam County and you're asking about mills, paper mills or something like that, now there's only one in Port Townsend Paper Company. And so you can't get information about them, and yet they're a very important employer. The same thing happens with in the maritime industry. The maritime industry is made up of 28 different NAICS codes, or North American Industry Classification System code types. And so you can't get information about maritime as an industry sector. Construction is not like that. Everything falls uniquely into the construction industry categories, but not for forest products, nor is it the case for maritime industry. So it's really challenging to get any data, and it very often on applications for for grants, you need to show data. And the only way we can do that is if we hire a consultant and they go in and do a survey of the companies. And then that frequently costs half as much as the grant is worth. So we pushed this bill through, and it was stopped at the committee level because Microsoft didn't want their data shared in any way or form beyond what it has to be shared. So we're looking at solutions like, okay, only apply it to rural communities, or there's got to be some answer to this, because rural communities are really blind about how their own economy is operating. We can get the data, but we have to pay Washington State University to receive the data. So it's not that it can't be had, you just have to be wealthy and have money to be able to get the data, which is an equity issue in my view. So that isn't a challenge if, you know, you're running King County or Pierce County and you want to know about things. You don't have that limitation that you're facing because you've got such a large pool of entities to be looking at. So, oh yeah, and I think everybody heard about Susie's Leadership Award from the governor. Yeah, I want to say publicly, congratulations, Dr. Ames, very, very well deserved. I think we all probably have heard that over the years, our enrollment in Peninsula College went from 2,000 down to 1,000. And then under Susie's short tenure, about 2 years now, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but you brought that back up to 1,600. So that is pretty damn impressive and deserves lots of kudos and award from the governor and the president as well, as I think.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I've said many times I feel like I won the lotto by moving here and being able to work at Peninsula College, and it just keeps proving every day. I'm going to be with you all on camera on next Wednesday at Coffee and Colleen, so I'll share some really exciting numbers that show our enrollment growth. It's off the rails, and couldn't be more thrilled. So faculty came back this week, and everyone's super excited to start the school year.
Yeah, you got a great team there, Susie.
Thank you.
All right,
So,
couple of questions in the chat I think I want to hit if we have time, Colleen.
Please do. Go ahead, Mike.
So at the end of the grant, how many individuals do we plan on seeing settled into stable, economically self-sustaining jobs? So again, between the two-county region, I think we had about 2,700 people in the prime age employment gap. You know, this is a gap where we trail behind that national average for the labor force participation rate. And over a 30-year period, we've gotten to the point where we lag behind them. Do you know exactly how many points on average we're behind? Is it 10 points behind the national average, roughly?
I'm sorry, of which?
The prime age employment gap, our labor force participation rate.
Yeah, we were not quite that far. Dan?
7%, I believe, for the EDA study period in Clallam County, and I think it was closer to 10% in Jefferson County. The weighted average would get it somewhere up around, you know, over 8%.
Okay, so we lag behind that national average by, you know, an average somewhere around 8%. If we are able to solve half of that in a 5-year period, we will be wildly successful, just to be frank. I don't think, you know, I think that we should be somewhat practical about that. We're not going to see 2,700 people quickly assimilated into the labor force in a 5-year period. What we're hoping to do is create systems that can be self-sustaining on their own. We're also hoping, you know, from that coalition perspective, if we identify wildly successful projects that we've done, we can start talking about what is the long-term strategy for self-funding that kind of work. I don't know if there will be one, but that's kind of the things that I think we're talking about. But I would say that, like, if we're able to transition 1,000 people into the labor market, we will be very successful. The other, do you agree, Colleen, or do you want to add anything to that?
No, great.
And then how do you plan to address the largest barrier that is enabling disconnected persons from the workforce, which is the social safety net? I think that our vision is we want to show people that they have a better future. And we do that through the good jobs. And that's kind of the carrot. And the way that we get them to that is, you know, is going to be complex. It's going to involve, you know, supports. but this is, again, not going to be an easy problem to untangle. One of the things that we talked a bit about through the process was benefit cliffs. Those are very real, and those do motivate people to not lose benefits. And on some level, on an individual level, I think that's very self-aware and self-interested, and I can't fault people for not wanting to lose benefits. On a bigger picture level, obviously, I think that's a huge problem. From my perspective, America was founded on hard work. And so I think that that's a social value that we need to consistently reinforce in our community. Yeah, Bill, do you want to jump in on that? You're definitely a subject matter expert.
Well, I would just say, and Mike, thank you very much. First of all, yeah, it's a long process. This isn't going to happen overnight, right? So when we sit down with a customer in WorkSource and we develop that employment plan, it's a self-sufficiency plan and, economic flourishment plan. And so I would say our new tools that enable us to do that we've had this commerce money that we're going to put with that as well. But we found that, a lot of times just using that for 1 or 2 months in that bridge gets them enough to get over the hump and get beyond that benefit cliff. And so that you're exactly right. It's difficult to fall back if we don't have some kind of bridge. And I think that's what we're focusing on our programs for all of these customers, because you're going to bring so many resources to them, so many things at the college and various stuff. But these dollars that we're going to be able to package along, assuming we're still funded this next year for the same amount, will really enable that. That's what we've been able to do with the boat school. It's what we've been able to do with a lot of those individual customers that we have at Peninsula as well. And so it just kind of lifts them through that period until we've got them into self-sufficiency wages. So, and if it takes a year, if it takes 2, we're committed to being able to be with those people. That's part of it, is they need to learn that we're in this together with you for the long haul, as long as you are focused on the goal, right? Continually focused. That's why our programs, if you miss one, if you don't do well for a month, you don't get the extra money. And so it's all based upon encouragement of persistence. So thank you, Mike.
Yeah, great answer. Yeah, and I think one of the things to talk about is some of that funding that Bill's talking about, as well as the Recompete funding, provides flexibility that we really don't usually see. And so that enables us to kind of create that bridge to solve that benefit cliff problem. How many unfilled jobs do we have over $26 an hour in Clallam and Jefferson counties today? Colleen or Dan, do you have a good answer for that?
They're not 2,700, and that was a big part of the problem, and why we're worried. I'm worried that we'll find these people, we'll address their barriers, we'll get them the workforce training needed, but then where's the job? And we certainly don't want them moving away. That's not the intention here. So when Dan and I did a look at this in the 2-county region, there were about 900 jobs available, but the vast majority of those jobs required a 4-year degree, which we're not going to be able to provide in this 5-year period. And so we were really looking at jobs that just required a 2-year or less programs, certificate kind of program, to get them into the workforce. And that's what NREC is focused on. So really hoping that it can get funded. One thing I wanted to emphasize was all of this Recompete program that Congressman Kilmer shepherded through Congress was designed by a PhD economist from a famous institution nationally. And his name's Timothy Bartik. And what he showed over and over again in communities is that if you don't get these people back into the workforce, into the labor force, then your community will never get out of persistent poverty. That just by having a large percentage of your population that should be in the workforce not engaged in the workforce, you don't have the tools necessary to move out of persistent poverty. So this has to be addressed. We've got to get to these people and show them a pathway of prosperity that can occur by being engaged in the labor force and getting a job where you get pride in what you're doing. It gives you purpose, all of that, rather than just eking by on the social safety net. So we were really hopeful that we can show, this again is called a pilot program. The federal government will really be looking at the 6 entities that have received funding, that can this work? Can this actually change our economy in Clallam County? And just huge kudos and thanks to Representative Kilmer for shepherding this through and helping us to, get to the point where we all came together with a common vision.
And then I want to add, Colleen's really the expert when it comes to employer recruiting, but I think there is some amount of a chicken and egg thing happening with that. Employers want to know that they have a workforce. If we upskill our workforce, if we invest in our workforce, I think we will do ourselves favors when it comes to the ability for us to recruit employers that don't rely on importing their own workforce, because as we all know, we don't have housing for the imported workforce. So focusing on our workforce, I think, will pay dividends as far as how many jobs could we put people into? Well, when we have a workforce, employers can create jobs. So.
No. All right. Angela has a question. What's the average wage in Clallam County per hour, not salary? That's a really challenging one to get to because so many people don't work 40 hours a week. Lots of restaurants put people on the schedule at 30 and 32 hours because if they hit 40, then they have to pay time and a half, which flips their ability to be economically sustainable. So what the kind of information that we get is what was the total pay that an individual received, but then we don't have information about how many hours that they actually worked. So that's one of the challenges that we've been complaining about, that we can't get actual data for our county. So anyway, Dan Underwood, who's not on screen right now, has looked into that in detail. But it's not high, and it's certainly not the $26 to $28 an hour that is needed. So with that, Mike, did you want to make any closing comments or?
No, those were great questions. We really appreciate it. Una Wirkebau was here on the chat. She put her email into the chat. And so if anybody wants to contact her to make connections, we definitely want to have as many connections as possible for this program. And I know she's working on a women's empowerment workshop in October. I don't know if Una, you want to do a quick plug for that?
Sure. So working with OWDC on a collaborative effort, it's called a Women's Empowerment Workshop. So it's not a typical job fair. It will be much more interactive and much more personalized. We have some members actually on the call right now that'll be part of a panel to kick it off at 10:30 on the 11th. It's going to be located at a female-owned business in Port Angeles called The Hub. And then from there, there'll be, we're providing childcare. And this event is totally free, of course. And there will be a clothing closet for individuals to take home outfits. There will be resume help. There will be branding help. Literally, if you're an entrepreneur or if you're looking to get into the workforce, this location will have a number of people from across the region to literally handhold the process. It's kind of a pre-recompete kind of concept where we can actually talk to individuals who would like to change their current dynamic or start looking at a different dynamic to provide income to support themselves and their families. So anyone on the call is welcome to participate. I encourage you to reach out. We need, even though we don't have our contract yet in place with EDA, it's happening very soon. It's like with attorneys now. So that is imminent. But meanwhile, there is a lot of work going on back of the house to ensure that we kick off with already having interactions with our local community.
Right. Okay. Thanks so much, everyone. Thank you, Una, for that. And Yep, Una's information is in the chat if you want to connect with her. All right, thanks everyone. Have a great day. Thanks for joining
Thank you.
us.